You planted it yourself, didn't you? The words cut through the night air before the sirens even finished fading, low and steady, like they didn't belong to fear at all. Officer Ethan Briggs didn't answer. He just stood there beside the open trunk, one gloved hand holding up a small, clear evidence bag, the streetlights catching on the powder inside like it meant something final. Red and blue reflections washed over the wet asphalt, over the line of parked cars, over the small cluster of bystanders who had slowed, phones halfway raised, unsure if what they were seeing was routine or something else entirely. Briggs tilted his head slightly, the faintest smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Ma'am," he said, voice flat, rehearsed, "this was found in your vehicle. You want to explain that?" The woman didn't move right away. She stood on the curb, rain threading down the shoulders of her navy suit, hands visible, posture straight in a way that didn't match the scene. Most people shifted, protested, raised their voices. She didn't. Her eyes stayed on the bag, then lifted to meet his, calm but unyielding. "Chain of custody starts the moment you claim discovery," she said quietly. A pause. Not confusion, something closer to friction. One of the younger officers glanced at Briggs, uncertain, then back at her. The woman stepped forward just enough for the streetlight to catch her face more clearly. There was no panic there, only focus, like she was already 3 steps ahead in a conversation no one else realized they were having. "Your body camera was off when you opened that trunk," she continued, voice even. "Turn it on. Now." The words didn't rise. They didn't need to. They landed. Heavy. Final. Briggs's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before he reached up and tapped the device clipped to his chest. A soft beep. Too late. The sound seemed to echo longer than it should have. A car passed at the end of the block, tires hissing over wet pavement, then disappeared, leaving the street suspended again in that strange, waiting silence. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Briggs said, tone sharpening just enough to show the edge beneath the badge. He took a step closer, holding the evidence bag higher, as if proximity could make it more real, more undeniable. "Step away from the vehicle." She did, without resistance, moving exactly as instructed, but her gaze never broke from his. There was something in it now, not defiance, not exactly certainty. The kind that unsettles people who rely on control. A man across the street lowered his phone slightly, frowning, sensing something wasn't aligning the way it should. The woman's voice came again, softer this time, almost like she was stating a fact to herself. "You chose the wrong night." Briggs let out a short breath, half laugh, half dismissal. "And why's that?" he asked. The woman finally glanced away, just for a second, toward the line of flashing lights, the officers shifting their weight, the quiet hum of radios filling the gaps between words. Then she looked back at him, and when she spoke again, there was no hesitation left. "Because everything you do from this moment on," she said, "is going to be recorded, reviewed, and remembered." Another pause. This one deeper. The kind that settles into the bones of a scene before anyone understands why. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled low across the sky, the storm not quite here yet, but close enough to feel. Briggs's grip tightened around the evidence bag, the plastic crinkling faintly in his hand. For a brief second, just one, something flickered across his expression. Not doubt, not yet, but something close to awareness. And then it was gone. "Turn around," he ordered, reaching for the cuffs. The woman complied, smooth, controlled, as if the motion itself was part of a larger sequence already set in motion long before this street, this night, this moment. The metal clicked softly into place, not harsh, not violent, just final. But even as the sound settled, there was a shift in the air, subtle but undeniable, like the first crack of something that would not stay hidden for long. The holding room smelled faintly of disinfectant and old metal, the kind of place designed to feel temporary, but somehow always carried the weight of permanence. Naomi Carter sat on the narrow bench, her hands now free but still resting in her lap, as if the cuffs had never left. The fluorescent light above hummed softly, casting a pale reflection across the steel table bolted to the floor. She did not fidget. She did not pace. She breathed slow, measured, each inhale steady, each exhale controlled, like she was regulating something deeper than nerves. Outside the small reinforced window, shadows moved back and forth, silhouettes of officers passing, pausing, whispering in tones that were meant to stay contained but did not quite succeed. Her name had already begun to travel. Not loudly, not officially, but in that quiet ripple that spreads faster than any announcement. Carter. Naomi Carter. The name meant something in rooms like this, even if the people saying it did not fully understand why yet. She lifted her gaze to the glass, catching her own reflection layered over the blurred hallway beyond. For a moment, the past pressed forward, not as memory, but as presence. Long nights at a small wooden desk in a one-bedroom apartment, casebooks stacked higher than the lamp beside them, pages marked with notes written in careful, deliberate handwriting. Her grandmother's voice in the background, low and steady, reminding her that excellence was not optional, that it was armor. She had learned early that composure was not a personality trait. It was survival. A faint sound broke through her thoughts, the click of a door opening somewhere down the hall, followed by the muted cadence of a conversation that stopped too quickly. Naomi did not need to hear the words to understand the tone. Doubt had entered the room, and doubt had a way of changing everything. She shifted slightly on the bench, not out of discomfort but intention, aligning her posture as if she were already seated somewhere else entirely, somewhere with higher ceilings, heavier doors, and consequences that carried weight beyond a single night. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, directed not at anyone present but at the quiet space around her. Procedure leaves a trail, she said. It always does. The clock mounted high on the wall ticked forward, each second distinct, each one marking distance between accusation and truth. Somewhere deeper in the building, a phone rang once, then stopped. A chair scraped faintly across tile. Naomi closed her eyes for a brief moment, not to escape, but to focus, tracing the sequence in her mind with precise clarity. The stop, the trunk, the timing of the body camera, the angle of the streetlight. Details did not blur for her. They sharpened. That was how she had built everything she was. When she opened her eyes again, the calm had not changed, but something beneath it had. Settled into place, firm, unmovable. The door to the holding room opened with a controlled, deliberate motion. A younger officer stepped in first, hesitant, followed by a woman in a tailored gray suit who carried herself with quiet authority. The air shifted immediately, subtle but undeniable. The woman's eyes moved to Naomi, assessing, recognizing, and in that single glance, the distance between accusation and reality began to narrow. Naomi stood, slow and composed, smoothing the front of her jacket as if she were preparing to step into a courtroom rather than remain in a holding room. The fluorescent light flickered once, then steadied. And in that stillness, before a single word was spoken, it became clear that whatever had been set in motion out on that rain-soaked street was not going to end here. The woman in the gray suit stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind her with a soft, controlled click that seemed to quiet the hallway noise instantly. She did not rush. She did not speak right away. Instead, she studied Naomi Carter with a level of attention that felt precise, almost clinical, as if she were confirming something she already suspected. Naomi held her gaze, steady and unflinching, her posture unchanged, her presence grounded in a calm that did not need to prove itself. The younger officer shifted near the door, uncertain where to stand, his weight moving from one foot to the other as the silence stretched just long enough to carry meaning. The woman in gray finally spoke, her voice low, composed, and unmistakably authoritative. "Judge Carter," she said, not as a question, but as acknowledgement. The word judge settled into the room like a key turning in a lock. The younger officer straightened immediately, his expression tightening as realization caught up with him. Naomi gave a slight nod, nothing exaggerated, nothing defensive, just confirmation. "I was wondering how long it would take for someone to say it out loud," she replied, her tone even, almost reflective. The woman in gray stepped closer to the table, placing a thin folder down with deliberate care. The paper inside did not move, but its presence shifted the atmosphere in a way that was impossible to ignore. "My name is Allison Reed," she said. "Office of Inspector General." Another pause. Not for effect, but for clarity. The words carried weight, and she allowed them to land fully before continuing. "We received a call about this stop before you even arrived here." Naomi's eyes narrowed slightly, not in surprise, but but in calculation. Pieces were aligning faster now. That would mean someone else saw it, she said quietly. Reed gave a small nod. More than one person, and at least one of them recorded it. The younger officer's breath caught almost imperceptibly, the kind of reaction that revealed more than any statement. Naomi turned her head just enough to acknowledge him, not accusing, not questioning, simply aware. Evidence does not disappear just because someone wants it to, she said, her voice carrying the same steady cadence as before. Reed watched her for a moment longer, then opened the folder, sliding a single printed image across the table. It was a still frame, slightly grainy, pulled from a civilian recording. The angle was imperfect, the lighting uneven, but the outline was clear enough. A figure at the rear of a vehicle. A motion that did not match the official sequence of events. Naomi looked down at the image, her expression unchanged, but her focus sharpened. Timestamp, she asked. 7 minutes before the body camera activated, Reed answered. The room went still again, but this time the silence felt different. Not suspended, not uncertain, but tightening, like something drawing inward before release. Naomi exhaled slowly, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the table now, grounding herself in the present moment. Then the timeline does not belong to him anymore, she said. Reed closed the folder with a quiet snap, the sound precise, final. No, she replied. It does not. Outside the room, footsteps passed again, but they sounded distant now, less significant. Inside, the balance had shifted. Not completely, not yet, but enough to change the direction of everything that would follow. Naomi straightened slightly, her shoulders settling into a familiar alignment, the kind she carried into courtrooms where truth was not assumed but proven. And for the first time since the trunk had opened on that rain-soaked street, the accusation against her no longer felt like a wall. It felt like something that could be dismantled, piece by piece, until nothing remained but the truth waiting underneath. The hallway outside the holding room no longer carried the same careless rhythm it had minutes before, the footsteps slower now, voices lower, as if the building itself had begun to sense that something had shifted beneath its surface. Naomi Carter stepped out beside Allison Reed, her movements measured, composed, the quiet authority in her posture no longer contained by the small room behind her. The younger officer followed at a distance, no longer unsure where to stand, but clearly aware that he was now standing in the presence of something far larger than a routine arrest. Reed walked with purpose, the soft click of her heels against the tile floor echoing in steady intervals, guiding them down the corridor toward a secured office at the end of the hall. Inside, the space was clean, organized, a wall of monitors displaying different camera feeds, timestamps ticking forward in silent precision. Reed gestured toward one of the chairs, but Naomi remained standing, her gaze already fixed on the largest screen where a paused video frame waited. The same angle, the same street, the same moment that had started everything. Play it from 30 seconds before the stop, Naomi said, her voice calm but firm, not a request, not a command, but something that carried the weight of both. Reed nodded once and pressed a key. The footage moved. Grainy, slightly off angle. A civilian recording from across the street, but enough to see what mattered. A patrol car pulling up. Lights activating. A figure stepping out. Briggs. His movements confident, controlled, practiced. Naomi watched without blinking, her attention narrowing to the smallest details, the timing of each step, the position of his hands, the way he glanced over his shoulder before approaching the vehicle. Pause, she said. The image froze. Her finger lifted slightly, pointing not at him, but just beyond him, toward the reflection in the side panel of the car. Reed leaned in closer, adjusting the contrast, sharpening the frame. The reflection clarified just enough. A subtle motion. A hand moving near the rear of the vehicle before the trunk was ever opened. Reed exhaled quietly, the sound barely audible, but heavy with implication. He approached the back before initiating contact. Reed said, more to confirm than to question. Naomi gave a small nod. Which means the sequence he reported is already compromised, she replied. Her tone did not rise, but the certainty in it filled the room more than any raised voice could. Reed advanced the footage. The timeline unfolded, second by second, each moment stacking against the official report like evidence that refused to align. The body camera activation came later, exactly as Naomi had stated. The gap was no longer theoretical. It was visible, measurable, real. Reed stepped back from the console, folding her arms as she processed the implications, her expression tightening not with surprise, but with the recognition of a pattern she had likely seen before. "This is not just misconduct," she said quietly. "This is deliberate." Naomi turned slightly, her eyes moving from the screen to Reed, then to the younger officer who stood near the doorway, his face pale, his posture rigid. "Deliberate actions leave deliberate traces," Naomi said. "And those traces do not disappear just because someone believes they will not be questioned." The officer swallowed, nodding faintly, as if acknowledging a truth he had not been prepared to face. Reed closed the distance to the table, placing both hands firmly against its surface, grounding the moment in something solid. "We are going to secure every piece of footage, every log, every dispatch record connected to this stop," she said. "Nothing moves without review." Naomi listened, her expression unchanged, but something deeper settled into place behind her eyes, a quiet alignment between patience and inevitability. "He made a calculation," she said after a brief pause. "He believed the uniform would be enough." Reed met her gaze. "And now?" Naomi's answer came without hesitation, her voice steady, unwavering. "Now the record will speak." The monitors continued to glow softly, each frame holding fragments of a truth that was no longer hidden, only waiting to be assembled, and in that room, under the steady hum of machines and measured breaths, the balance of power had begun to shift in a way that could not be reversed. The monitors continued to replay the same sequence in quiet loops, each pass revealing something that could no longer be explained away, and yet outside that room the world had already begun to react, as if the accusation were truth. Naomi Carter stood still, her reflection faintly visible in the glass of the largest screen, her posture unchanged even as the weight of what was unfolding pressed in from every direction. A notification sound broke the silence, sharp and out of place, and the younger officer instinctively glanced down at his phone before catching himself. Too late. The ripple had already reached them. Reed turned slightly. "What is it?" she asked. The officer hesitated, then answered carefully. "Local news picked it up," he said. "They are saying a federal judge was detained during a traffic stop involving suspected narcotics." The words landed differently than anything else so far. Not because they were louder, but because they carried beyond the walls of the building, beyond the control of procedure and evidence. Naomi closed her eyes for a brief second, not in frustration, but in recognition. This was the part that did not wait for truth. This was the part that moved faster than it. Reed exhaled slowly, her gaze shifting toward the monitors, then back to Naomi. "We can contain the evidence," she said, "but we cannot stop the narrative once it starts." Naomi opened her eyes again, calm returning just as quickly as it had left. "Then we do not chase the narrative," she replied. "We outlast it." The officer near the door shifted again, this time not from uncertainty, but from discomfort, the kind that comes when the story you thought you understood begins to unravel in front of you. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Naomi with a respect that had not been there before. "There are already comments online. People are saying things. About you." He did not finish the sentence, but he did not need to. Naomi met his gaze briefly, her expression neither hardened nor softened, simply steady. "People always say things when they are given only half of the truth," she said. "The problem is not that they speak. The problem is what they are given to believe." Reed stepped toward the console again, pulling up another feed, this time from the patrol unit's internal system. Dispatch logs, timestamps, radio communication transcripts scrolling in clean, digital lines. "We are going to need everything," Reed said, her voice more focused now, more urgent in a controlled way. "Call records, unit assignments, prior complaints, anything connected to Briggs." The name settled into the room with a new kind of gravity, not as authority, but as a subject under examination. The younger officer nodded quickly, already moving toward the door. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his tone shifting fully into compliance. As the door closed behind him, the room grew quieter again, but not empty, not uncertain. Naomi stepped closer to the table, placing her fingertips lightly against its surface, grounding herself. Not in emotion, but in process. He expected this to move quickly, she said, almost to herself. Fast accusation. Immediate judgment. No time for questions. Reed watched her carefully. And now, Naomi's gaze lifted to the screen once more, the paused frame still holding the moment before everything changed. Now time becomes the one thing he cannot control, she answered. Outside, the faint sound of distant voices carried through the hallway. Sharper now, more alert, as if the building itself had begun to shift into a different state of awareness. Inside the room, the air felt heavier, but clearer, like the moment just before a storm breaks, when everything is still but nothing is uncertain anymore. Naomi remained standing, composed, unshaken, even as her name moved through a world that had not yet heard the truth, and in that contrast, between what was being said and what was being proven, the tension reached its highest point, not in noise, but in the quiet certainty that the truth, once revealed, would not ask for permission to be believed. The first light of morning did not arrive suddenly. It crept in, pale and quiet, stretching across the edges of the room until the monitors no longer dominated the space and the shadows softened into something more defined. Naomi Carter stood exactly where she had been minutes before, but the air around her had changed, not in temperature, not in sound, but in certainty. Allison Reed remained at the console, her eyes scanning lines of fresh data that had just populated the screen, the overnight requests returning with more than she had expected. "We have something," Reed said, her voice steady but carrying a new weight beneath it. Naomi did not move right away. She turned slowly, her attention shifting from the window to the screen, the transition deliberate, controlled. Reed stepped aside, giving her a clear view. Dispatch logs, internal systems sync, and vehicle telemetry, Reed continued. All aligned. She tapped the screen once, bringing forward a layered timeline, each segment marked with exact time stamps down to the second. Naomi stepped closer, her eyes narrowing slightly as she absorbed the sequence. "Walk me through it," she said. Reed nodded. At 9:14 p.m., Officer Briggs initiates a stop. At 9:15, his vehicle records a rear proximity alert, which means he was at the back of your car before any official contact was logged. At 9:16, there is a manual override on the body camera system. It goes offline for exactly 2 minutes and 12 seconds. Reed paused, letting the number settle before continuing. At 9:18, the camera comes back on. That is when he approaches you and begins the recorded interaction. The room went still again, but this time the silence was not heavy. It was precise. Naomi's gaze remained fixed on the timeline, each second now carrying a meaning that could not be rewritten. "And the evidence log?" she asked. Reed switched the display. "Filed at 9:22 p.m., but the system shows the entry was drafted earlier, at 9:13. Naomi did not react immediately. She traced the sequence in her mind, the structure forming clearly, cleanly, without distortion. "He documented the discovery before the stop was complete," she said. Reed met her gaze. "Yes." A breath passed between them, not tense, not uncertain, just enough to acknowledge the weight of what had been confirmed. Reed reached for another file, pulling up a secondary video feed. "There is more," she said. The screen shifted again, this time showing footage from a delivery van parked across the street. The angle was wider, clearer than the civilian clip from the night before. The scene played without sound, but it did not need it. The patrol car. The early movement. The brief moment at the rear of the vehicle. The hand motion, subtle but unmistakable now under daylight clarity. Reed paused the video at the exact frame where the motion completed. "This aligns with the gap in the body camera feed," she said. Naomi exhaled slowly, not in relief, not in surprise, but in recognition of a truth that had fully surfaced. The pieces were no longer fragments. They were structure. "He believed no one would look closely enough," Naomi said quietly. Reed shook her head slightly. "He believed no one would question him," she corrected. The distinction settled into the room with quiet force. Naomi straightened, her posture returning to its full presence, not as defense, but as alignment with what was now undeniable. "Then the question is no longer whether it happened," she said. "The question is how far it goes." Reed closed the files one by one, each click deliberate, final. "We are escalating this," she said. "Internal affairs, federal oversight, and formal charges." Naomi nodded once, her gaze steady, her voice calm but carrying a depth that had been building since the moment the trunk opened. "Then let the record move forward," she said. Outside, the first full rays of sunlight broke across the parking lot, cutting through the last traces of rain, illuminating everything with a clarity that left no room for shadows to hide. And inside that room, the truth had done the same. The courtroom was quieter than usual, not empty, but contained, as if every person inside understood that what was about to unfold would not be routine. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long, clean lines across the polished wood floor, illuminating the space with a clarity that felt almost deliberate. Naomi Carter stepped forward toward the front of the room, her black robe settling naturally around her shoulders, every movement controlled, grounded, unchanged from who she had always been. Across the room, Officer Ethan Briggs sat at the defense table, no longer standing behind a badge on the street, no longer directing the flow of a moment, but positioned within it, contained by it. His posture was still upright, but there was a tension now that had not been there before, something quieter, something less certain. Papers rested neatly in front of him, but his hands did not move toward them. The room held a stillness that was not passive, but expectant. Allison Reed stood to the side, a file in her hands, her presence calm but unmistakably firm, the kind of presence that did not need to announce itself to be understood. The proceedings began without flourish, without unnecessary words, the structure of the room guiding everything forward with steady precision. Evidence was presented not as argument, but as sequence. The timeline appeared on the screen, each timestamp aligned, each entry confirmed. The gap in the body camera footage, the early drafting of the evidence log, the vehicle telemetry placing movement at the rear of the car before any official interaction. Each detail placed carefully, methodically, until the pattern was no longer a suggestion, but a structure that could not be dismissed. The room did not react loudly. It did not need to. The weight of the information settled into the silence, shifting it, reshaping it. Naomi remained composed, her gaze steady, not fixed on Briggs, but on the process itself, on the unfolding of something that did not rely on emotion. To carry its truth, Reed advanced the final piece, the delivery van footage, clearer now, stabilized, the motion at the rear of the vehicle visible in full context. The screen paused at the exact moment that bridged everything together, the missing piece no longer missing. For a brief second, the entire room seemed to hold its breath, not in suspense, but in recognition. Briggs's eyes moved toward the screen, then away, then back again, as if searching for a version of the moment that no longer existed. His composure did not collapse, but it shifted, the certainty that had once defined him now replaced with something quieter, something internal. The judge presiding over the hearing leaned forward slightly, reviewing the sequence once more, not hurried, not influenced, but deliberate. The decision that followed was delivered in a tone that matched the room, calm, precise, and final. The findings were clear. The actions were intentional. The consequences would follow accordingly. There was no raised voice, no dramatic pause, only the steady confirmation that what had been constructed in the dark had now been brought fully into the light. Naomi stood without urgency, her posture unchanged, her expression composed, but there was a depth in her gaze that carried something more than resolution. Not triumph, not vindication, something quieter, something grounded. She turned slightly as the proceedings concluded, her eyes meeting Reed's for a brief moment, an acknowledgement without words, a shared understanding of what it takes to bring truth into a space where it is not always welcomed. Around them, the room began to move again, chairs shifting, papers gathering, voices returning in low tones, but the shift had already occurred. The balance had already changed. And as Naomi stepped forward, leaving the space with the same measured calm she had carried into it, the silence that remained behind did not feel empty. It felt complete. The courthouse steps held the quiet warmth of late morning, sunlight settling across the wide stone like a calm that had been earned rather than given. Naomi Carter stepped out through the tall doors, her pace unhurried, her posture unchanged, the weight of the black robe resting naturally against her shoulders as the world outside came back into focus. The air felt different here, open, steady, carrying the distant sounds of the city without urgency, without distortion. A small group had gathered at the base of the steps, not loud, not pressing forward, just present, watching with a kind of still attention that did not need to speak to be understood. Naomi paused for a moment, not for them, but within herself, allowing the transition from inside to outside to settle fully. Behind her, the doors closed with a soft, final sound, not dramatic, not heavy, but complete. She did not look back. The path ahead was clear, framed by the long lines of the building and the open space beyond. A light breeze moved through the columns, catching the edge of her robe, lifting it slightly before letting it fall again. The motion subtle, almost symbolic, like something passing through without resistance. At the bottom of the steps, a young girl stood beside her mother, her small hand wrapped around a worn paperback book, her eyes fixed upward with quiet intensity. Naomi noticed her, not immediately, but as she drew closer, as their paths aligned for a brief moment in the open space between the structure and the street. The girl did not speak. She did not move. She simply watched, as if trying to understand something she had never seen before but somehow recognized. Naomi slowed just enough to meet her gaze, and in that exchange, there was no need for explanation, no need for words. Just a shared recognition, quiet and real. Naomi gave a small nod, not formal, not distant, but human, and the girl's grip on the book tightened slightly, as if holding onto something that had just become clearer. Around them, the city continued, cars passing, distant voices rising and falling, the rhythm of ordinary life resuming without pause. But within that moment, something had shifted, not loudly, not visibly, but deeply. Naomi continued forward, each step measured, grounded, carrying with it the same calm certainty she had held from the beginning. There was no triumph in her expression, no outward claim of victory, only a quiet alignment with what had always been true. The sunlight followed her as she moved, reflecting softly against the glass of nearby buildings, creating brief flashes of brightness that faded as quickly as they appeared. Somewhere behind her, inside the courthouse, decisions were being documented, records finalized, consequences set into motion that would extend far beyond the steps she had just descended. But Naomi did not carry that forward with her. She carried something else, something lighter but stronger. The certainty that truth, once uncovered, does not need to defend itself. It simply stands. As she reached the sidewalk, the breeze softened, the noise of the city blending into a steady, familiar hum, and for a brief moment, everything felt still, not because the world had stopped, but because it no longer needed to rush. Naomi walked on, her figure gradually merging with the flow of people and motion, but the space she left behind did not feel empty. It held a quiet resonance, like the echo of something that had been set right, something that would remain long after the moment itself had passed, not in words, not in headlines, but in the silent understanding that justice, when it arrives, does not announce itself. It is simply recognized,